allow me to welcome you to the Dead Boy Detective Agency. We help ghosts resolve their mysteries.
Guys, I love this show. I love this show so much. I love this relationship. For our readers, explain who your characters are and how they got to where they are. So, George, you can go first.
So my character, he's called Edwin Payne, and in 1916 he died as the result of a demonic summoning ritual gone very, very wrong. And that sent him to hell for over 70 years. He managed to escape, and shortly after his escape, he went back to his old school, St. Hilarions, where he died, and came across Charles, who was on the cusp of death, and Edwin actually nursed him in his final few hours. And then Charles died, and they ran off together and started a supernatural detective agency.
He died in 1989. The reason for his death was hypothermia and internal bleeding. The reason of those injuries, quite brutal, but obviously it was his friends at the time. It happened because he stuck up for somebody who was from the same background as him, and he ended up dying at the school where he meets Edwin, and just like George said, the rest is kind of history, really.
The rest is history, Damien.
And now here we are.
George, for your character, because he came from such a restrained era, what makes him think that this is a good idea?
I suppose, in terms of the taking on the cases, I think Edwin is innately very curious, first of all. I think being a detective, after 30 plus years, that's his main purpose in life. So, and, he pursues that relentlessly. And I suppose, he's fighting the injustice of his own death. So that's the other reason why he's taking on these cases. And I think what's cool about the show is before the pilot, all of their cases would have taken place in London. Whereas the work setup is very much... Edwin is very much challenged by being plonked in Port Townsend, Washington.
Well, she straight away turns the cases from supernatural to real life in the first 20 minutes of the show.
When you guys get to Washington and you start to meet these different characters there, how does that impact the relationship you guys share?
Well, I think from the moment Crystal kind of comes into the agency, I think things change between Edwin and Charles, and then obviously some of the characters we meet throughout, like you said, are wild. I want to give a special shout out to Dagfinn in episode 4, the guy who haunts the people at the lighthouse. A fun fact about him, which a lot of people won't know, but this is a massive shout out to Kelly Dunsmore, our incredible costume designer, but she actually put him in a Neil Gaiman jumper, so that's actually an Easter egg for everybody to look out for.
She went on his Facebook page and found a picture of him wearing that exact jumper.
And put it onto Dagfinn.
And so let's talk about this for people just coming to the show and maybe don't know the Gaiman stuff. Tell me about your characters. Cassius, you can go first.
Okay, so I play Crystal Palace, who is this psychic medium. I sort of imagine her as a bridge between these two worlds, the world that we know and live in, and then this weird, wonderful afterlife that the show exists in. She's got some interesting powers. I don't know how much I can say. And we sort of track her throughout the series as she's coming to terms with herself and where she fits in the world.
And now you, I was talking with Steve and Beth earlier, and I was worried because I felt the way Nico was introduced, I was like, oh, they might be able to kill this character off. And as the show goes on, she actually becomes more and more important. I heard you improvised your only line in the first episode.
You bet, you bet. I said I'm going to show them my best work. Nico's such a fun character. She doesn't exist in the comic book, so it really was a creation between Steve, myself, Beth, and our head of departments. And she's a young, whimsical woman who is obsessed with love, doesn't know how to be sarcastic to save her life, and she's Crystal's neighbor, and they live at Jenny's butcher shop. And we meet her, and she's already larger than life, but something strange and supernatural happens to her, and she gets help from our favorite dead boys.
What made you want to take these characters, especially because they were kind of launched or introduced to a lot of people in Doom Patrol, if they hadn't read the books, obviously. What made you think these characters really could pop on screen?
Well, I wrote that episode of Doom Patrol, so I introduced them. So that was me. Jeremy Carver gave me permission to take his car out for a ride one day. I discovered this comic. I was a huge Neil Gaiman fan when I was in high school, and continue to be. But I discovered this comic book when I was going through a period of loss in my life, and it was oddly comforting in like a really psychedelic kind of way, but it was comforting. And so when I had a little bit of what I thought was goodwill at Warner Brothers, I went to DC and was like, I would really love to have this tiny little property that no one's talking about, that's probably sitting on a shelf somewhere. Can I have it? And they said no. And then, and I cried. And then there was a little bit of a turnover at DC, and like in the dust up, I like snuck in there and was like, hey, by the way, can I have this property? And because I think they were going through a period of transition, the request got to Jim Lee, who talked to Neil Gaiman, and then they said yes. So it's a fluke that I got it, but I've certainly, I think, made a meal of having it.
And Beth, you were coming off of a DC property that I'm sure had garnered you a lot of goodwill with them. You'd like Arrow went out, like you'd been with the show for so long, and given a character who, much like Edwin and Charles, was kind of, he was kind of tertiary to a lot of the bigger DC titles, and then you brought him into a world where, almost 10 seasons and, all of this wonderful stuff. What was it like for you coming into a world where you're like, oh, I know how to do these, small characters and bring them big?
It was fun in the sense where, unlike Arrow, the tone is obviously very different, but there are some aspects, that we have darker episodes, and some of the tone has that darkness that Arrow had. But I feel like at the core of it are these characters, and I think that's what made Arrow so popular was the Arrow, but his team around him. And I feel like hopefully that's what will make Dead Boys so popular, is the two boys at the center, but then it's the group of the team around them and the core friendship groups. And that's what people, I think, besides all the fun and the genre aspect and the world building, I think it's if you don't love your central characters, if you don't fall in love with them, then you don't have a show.
Yeah, we're making the Hardy Boys on acid, except the most important thing, so we can do every crazy thing in the world, but the most important thing is that these boys chose each other over going to the afterlife and potentially having a blissful forever, to stay here and help other people. And I think that friendship is sort of what it's all built around.
Mm-hmm.